We've all been there before. You're sitting in a history class, half awake, while someone up front draws a timeline on the board and tells you exactly how everything happened. Clean, neat, done. And somewhere in the back of your skull, a small voice whispers that it all seems a little too tidy. Turns out that voice was right, and historians have spent decades quietly pulling threads until the whole sweater unraveled. So let's get into it. Number 6. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. You've heard this your whole life. Maybe you repeated it at a party. It's the kind of fact that makes you feel smart for knowing it, which is exactly how you know it isn't true. The wall is long, sure, roughly 13,000 miles of it, but it's only about 15 to 30 feet wide. From low Earth orbit, that's like trying to spot a single hair laid across a football field. Astronauts have confirmed it. You cannot see it. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei looked for it during his 2003 mission and saw nothing. The myth had already been printed in a geography textbook as far back as 1932, decades before anyone had even been to space, which means someone just made it up with complete confidence, and the rest of us nodded along for a century. The wall is impressive, it didn't need the lie, but here we are. Number 5. Napoleon Bonaparte was unusually short. This one is a masterclass in losing something in translation. Literally, Napoleon stood about 5 feet 6 or 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was average to slightly above average for a Frenchman in the late 1700s. The confusion came from two places. First, the British press, which had every reason to mock him and drew cartoons of a tiny, tantrum-throwing emperor. Second, a units problem. French inches and English inches were not the same measurement. When French records listed him at roughly 5 feet 2 French inches, someone converted that without adjusting for the difference and handed the English-speaking world a short tyrant. His own soldiers called him Le Petit Caporal, but that was a term of affection, not a height assessment. So the most famous short man in history was just a regular-sized man surrounded by very committed propagandists. Number 4. Medieval people thought the Earth was flat. Imagine you're a scholar in the year 1100, surrounded by texts from Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Bede, all of which describe a spherical Earth in detail. You would not think the Earth was flat, because almost no educated person in medieval Europe did. This myth was essentially invented in the 1800s, largely popularized by a fictionalized biography of Christopher Columbus, written in 1828 by Washington Irving, who invented the flat Earth opposition to Columbus's voyage entirely for dramatic effect. It worked so well that people are still repeating it. The real reason Columbus had trouble getting funding wasn't that people thought he'd fall off the edge. He'd start on it, it was that educated people correctly calculated the Earth's circumference and told him, accurately, that he'd run out of supplies before reaching Asia. He got lucky that an entire continent was sitting in the way. The medieval scholars were right. Columbus was wrong. He just won anyway. Number 3. Einstein failed mathematics. You have almost certainly heard this one offered as comfort to someone struggling in school. It is not true, and it was never true. Einstein himself addressed it directly, saying he had mastered calculus before the age of 15. He did fail an entrance exam to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic at 16, but the exam was in French, which he hadn't fully learned yet, and he was 2 years younger than the typical applicant. He passed the mathematics section with high marks. The myth spread because people wanted a story about a genius who struggled, and Einstein's name was too famous to resist. It's a motivational poster dressed up in a lab coat, and the lab coat belongs to someone who definitely passed maths. Number 2, we only use 10% of our brains. Your brain is the most metabolically expensive organ in your body. It runs on about 20% of your total energy while sitting still. Evolution does not keep organs that expensive around if 90% of them are doing nothing. Brain imaging studies show activity across virtually all regions of the brain, just not all at once, which is also true of your muscles. The myth likely grew from a misreading of early neuroscience, or possibly from William James writing vaguely about untapped mental potential in the early 1900s. It got picked up, stripped of context, and handed to every self-help book ever written. The reality is slightly less flattering. Your whole brain is on all the time, and it still produces the decisions you make at 2 in the morning. Number 1. Vikings wore horned helmets. One single horned helmet has ever been found from the Viking Age, and it was almost certainly ceremonial, probably not even Norse in origin, dating to around 1,000 years before the Viking era. The iconic image of a warrior charging into battle with antlers on his head was popularized in the 19th century by a costume designer for a Wagner opera production, not a historian, a costume designer. The Vikings actually wore simple iron or leather helmets with a nose guard. practical, sensible, the most feared seafarers in European history, and they looked nothing like the logo on a football helmet. The horns were theater. The raids were very real. That's the tidy story for you. Mostly fiction written by someone who needed a better ending. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.